is mainly from two sides. Maulana Maududi's mistake there is from two sides. So when we talk about Islamic democracy, and it's not just Maulana Maududi's mistakes, but this mistake is being made even today by Muslim scholars and Muslim thinkers and Islamic movements. So the first mistake is, I think he has misunderstood what democracy actually is, or I should say he hasn't understood what democracy is at the deeper philosophical, conceptual, and foundational level. And that's the case with a lot of most Muslim scholars and thinkers, even today. And those people who have, those traditional scholars who have actually criticized the conception of democracy, they have criticized it from a narrow, and I'm not using narrow here is in any negative sense or derogatory sense, but narrow to just to demarcate something from a narrow fiqhi perspective. Like those who actually reject democracy or try to assess democracy, they try to do it from whether it is halal or haram. But what we need is more not the fiqhi assessment, but assessment from the perspective of Islamic, from the perspective of the spirit of Islam. In the same way in which, for example, Imam Ghazali in Ihya, he assesses all Islamic concept from a perspective of the spirit or the objectives, general objectives of Islam, from a perspective of ihsan, or from a perspective of tasawwuf, if you want to call it that, and not just halal and haram, because something can be halal, but being halal doesn't mean that it is how it should be, because being halal is just a minimum threshold. And the fiqhi perspective doesn't take into considerations the context as such. Even though, when you make fiqhi judgment, you do take into consideration the context, but the context you look at it is itself narrow fiqhi context and not the broader civilizational context. Okay, so the mistake Maulana Maududi makes at the level of Islamic, from his, in formulating his conception of Islamic democracy, is, on the first hand, he doesn't understand the modern contemporary democracy at the foundational philosophical level. And from Islamic perspective, the mistake he makes is that he tries to derive a political Islamic conception directly from Quran and Sunnah without considering the Islamic tradition, classical works in Islamic political philosophy and fiqh and all that. He doesn't contextualize his theorization of democracy in the context of the tradition of Islamic discipline, in the tradition of al-ulum al-Islamiyya. And if he had done that, at least partially, he would have found that his so because Islamic disciplines and the tradition of Islamic disciplines and Islamic discourses actually delimit, gives you the context. So if you're trying to understand Quran and Sunnah and the concept within it in the context of Islamic disciplines, then that will delimit the context of your theorization and your theoretical formulation than your understanding in the context of Islamic civilization. On the other hand, if you ignore Islamic discipline and Islamic ulum al-Islamiyya, fiqh, usul fiqh, classical works in political philosophy, like the work of Imam al-Haramain or work of Ibn Taymiyyah or work of Imam Ghazali and Imam Yusuf and all those who have written on Islamic political discourses and the Islamic principles which are formulated in fiqh and usul al-fiqh, if we ignore them, then your understanding of Quran and Sunnah would be actually delimited not by Islamic civilization, but by the current dominant civilization, because that is your context. That is your contextual understanding anyway, especially if you're dealing with it, like you're already, studying what democracy is and you're impressed by that. And then you go and look for Islamic understanding about that, or Islamic insights about that democracy without delimiting your understanding or without contextualizing your understanding in the context of Islamic disciplines, then you are going to be necessarily delimited and influenced by the dominant cultural and political and philosophical context, which is the context of liberal democracy. Okay.